if we thought this story was going away simply because his titles have been stripped, think again. You begin to wonder whether, you know, the royal family were preparing for something that might be coming, or worried that something might be coming, or that people like Congress have taken their opportunity to renew their request. He can't be forced, but can anything come of this, do you think, Salma? No one can force him there.
No.
What can be the consequence of Congress saying, we want you to come and answer some questions?
No, he can't be forced. And to be honest, here's the thing where it gets quite difficult, because this is political now. And as we've said on this programme many times before, the Epstein crimes have touched so many people, including the US president. And we're talking about Democrats here using power in the congressional committees to be able to call him. Now, in and of itself, transparency and light on this case is a good thing, and it's the right thing. But we can't forget that actually it is still wrapped up with very powerful individuals who still, for a lot of people, have questions to answer about their conduct with Epstein. And there is an element of politics to it, which I actually find quite distasteful.
Do you think there's any chance that he might go? If you remember in the very, very early stages when things started to emerge, of course, he still completely denies all the allegations, former Prince Andrew, I'm talking about, of course. He did say, I would be prepared to give testimony to lawyers. I would be prepared to talk to them. Is there a world in which you think, A, he might think, let me just deal with this head on because it can't get any worse, or indeed the King says, I don't want to look like you're not dealing with this?
Yeah, I mean, he did say that he would participate if it was necessary and helpful. And he's also, at the same time, denied all the allegations against him. But he's a witness, potentially, to things that happened, whether he was directly involved or not. He is a witness to things that were happening at parties and social occasions, if that's what you can call them, where young women were exploited. So I think, you know, the onus is really on him. But the truth of this is, Salma is right, there's a lot of politics with this in America because there's a lot of other names in those files, in those emails. But actually, you know, whatever else happens, you know, removing his titles, you know, there's some people saying he should have his campaign medal that he won in the Falklands removed. I'm not sure if that's the case. I think anybody who served, they got the medal for that. But it won't go away. And a quiet life, to be honest, is the best that probably the royal family can hope for with his retreat.
I know. Well, that is it, isn't it? It must make... Well, it's making a lot of people fear this is the beginning of a thread that will unravel the monarchy completely.
Absolutely. Well, the thing is now, it's almost the unthinkable could happen, which you could get criminal charges. Previously, maybe a fortnight ago, you would have thought, well, there's no way, even if there are criminal charges, that the government is going to try to extradite, you know, a prince, a royal. Now that he's no longer part of the royal family, you wonder whether that sort of unofficial rule will apply. So if they can get to criminal charges in the US, that'll be very interesting, because can the King or anybody really stand in their way?
No.
So we could get to that point.
But there is... I think we have to remember there is due process in all jurisdictions, whether it be the UK or the US. And that is that there has to be evidence, there has to be a case that's brought forward. And, you know, we know that Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein were both convicted for these crimes. But there is a threshold of evidence that needs to be met. I think that, you know, the interview that happened with Emily Maitlis and all those opportunities that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor was given to tell the truth, he did not take. And there is a world, I think, that rather than have all this pressure, maybe there is a place, a forum, that he can actually give his side, you know, unvarnished, total truth about what happened, because this isn't just about him. This is about that chapter and the way certain powerful people have behaved.
And the victims.
The problem is the interview with Emily Maitlis, to a certain extent, was that opportunity. And it didn't go. He shirked it. It didn't go his way.
Well, he might say he didn't shirk it, he told the truth. But it certainly didn't put him in a better light because of it, despite denying it all.
Let's just hope if he does end up in prison, it's not Wandsworth Prison, because he might not be in there for very long. He might be able to wander straight out when he wants to. Extraordinary more revelations about this prison story. We've been talking this week that up to March 25, 262 prisoners in England and Wales were released in error. Now we hear that over the past year, 90 violent or sex offenders have been released. I mean, both of you have worked
Mistakenly.
Yeah. Both of you have worked in the Home Office. And I know you said off air it was Ministry of Justice now that looks after the prison service. But the thing is, when this happens, I think all of us think, well, oh gosh, hopefully it's somebody with minor crimes. You know, that with the worst possible thing if it was violent offenders or sex offenders. But it is. And there is one that is still on the loose. This guy they haven't found, Kadur Sheriff, is still on the loose. He's on the sex offender register, was convicted of indecent exposure. That is really worrying for the victim.
And William
How will they
Smith,
feel?
the other one that yesterday morning we were talking about the double manhunt for, turned himself in.
Yeah.
So I think we're all just bewildered. I mean, we know mistakes happen. My goodness me, I make enough of them myself. But if you're talking about 2 people a day mistakenly released, what's going on?
Well, I mean, this is really fundamentally the question. And I don't think we got enough from the Justice Secretary, you know, this week as to what the answers are. And I would suggest that there needs to be a full statement to Parliament as to what they have discovered, as to why. Now, the prison service has been chronically underfunded for a very long time, and that was true when the Conservatives were in power, and it's still true today. There are new prisons that are coming on. There's a question about, you know, the justice system more generally.
Well, David Lammy wasn't on our programme yesterday. He sent a junior minister, but where he was breaking ground on the building of a new prison, and that's their argument, isn't it? That there were just not enough prisons and the system was crunched.
But if that doesn't answer the question as to why there are these mistaken releases, and, you know, we can talk about sort of incompetence in the system or whatever, but fundamentally, there are really big issues in the prison system. Pay for prison wardens, the kinds of people that you're getting in there. You know, in the last government, lots of experienced staff were let go of because there were huge cuts, and you've got newer, more inexperienced people.
And that was under the Conservatives.
And that was under the Conservatives.
Decision was made
absolutely.
by the Camerons, wasn't
absolutely.
it?
I think that's right. But I think this is, I mean, there has been an uptick in the last year, and I do think that possibly that may be connected to the fact that we have obviously seen, I think it was 38,000 early releases because the prisons are so full. So if the percentage of releases are going up, the percentage of mistakes being made are going to go up as well. But this has been going on for a long time. I think it is to do with money, but also it's to do with a culture too, between the courts, what happens in the courts and then what happens in the prisons. And then within the prison systems, people going from remand prisons to other prisons, people going from closed prisons to open prisons. I mean, I had 3 prisons in my constituency, 2 closed, 1 open, and we would look at things where actually people were incorrectly put in that way. But this is also about accountability. I mean, apparently, if it couldn't get worse, the governor of Wandsworth Prison wasn't there on the day that Sharif was released because he was conducting an inquiry into why someone else had been released from another prison. I think it was in the case this gentleman, because the guy who's still out there, when you look at his rap sheet, he's had about over 10 fences, been moved around, wrongly put to place. This is not the first time. And I think there's an accountability at the other end, though, by what goes on about checking the paperwork. And people just, professional curiosity to say, what's this all about? When he was sent wrongly by the courts to a prison, nobody picked up on that.
Well,
that
is what we were... I mean, we were talking yesterday to the chairman of Prison Officers Association and also a former inmate who just said they're basically just out of school, these kids. They've barely got any training. But and also, obviously, they say that mistakes are made because people can't read handwriting because it's all pen and paper and not digitised. But, you know, of course, that... I'm sure is part of the solution to get a better integrated digital system. However, you know, digitisation is relatively recent. We've had prisons for a long time in our country. You know, it's only really 80s that we started dealing with it that way. What did we do before? Or were people just mistakenly being released all down through the centuries? Why is it suddenly that you know, we're seeing these figures?
Well, I think there has always been an issue around sometimes being incorrectly released, something like 50 to 100 years. But I think part of it is the pressure on prisons. Potentially, there's more people going on early release. When you look at the guys out on the run at the moment, if that's the right word, what a checkered and complicated criminal history.
Yeah.
Sex offending, burglaries. Then he was sent to a deportation centre, but then he wasn't deported. He was back in the thing. I mean, nobody's looking at the whole person.
No.
So what happens is people are only looking at their bit. So Wandsworth looks at its bit, and then it gets really complicated. And there's nobody holding the rings on the case file on this guy to say, hang on, have we got this right? And it is about, as well, the lack of cooperation and collaboration and silo working that goes on between the courts and the prison system itself. It's like, we've done our bit, now it's your job. And I'd have to say, Salma, when they basically lost, you know, experienced prison officers, you always have to, in any workplace, have people who've got experience with those
and then do
coming
the
in.
training.
I accept
ridiculous.
that. I accept that. And you know that we don't go for partisan attacks on each other because that doesn't help. We're looking for outcomes. However, whilst I will accept our failings in government, I do think that the Justice Secretary's failure to actually come to Parliament with clear answers and offer a statement is exactly the kind of problem that compounds what we're seeing today. And so he needs to be transparent, because if you cannot be accountable to Parliament, how are we going to have an open conversation and solve any of this?
What Lammy did was, unfortunately, I think if Shabana Mahmood had been there, it would have been a different tone. Lammy used it as an opportunity to perform, because it was the first time he'd done that, answered questions at the dispatch box. Given what he knew, and given the questions that were coming across from him from Cartlidge, he could have adopted a different tone and given some space to come back later and say more.
Yeah.
Let's move on, because there's quite a lot to get through. There's a sort of link in these next two little bits here. Research by King's College London have talked to members of the public in a poll that said that the UK say the perceived tensions in the UK between immigrants and British-born people have risen to a new high. They suggested 86% of people now feel there is a tension between immigrants and people born in the UK. I mean, in a way that won't be surprised by what we see in the media all the time and some of the rhetoric and the politics, but those figures are quite high. That's quite frightening, really. And, you know, it's going to take a while to try and shorten that gap. If that many people are seeing these tensions, it's a bit of a worry, isn't it, Caroline?
Of course it's a worry, because, you know, let's be blunt about this. You know, often when people talk about immigrants, they're talking about people of a different colour to white. And then what happens is everybody who is not white, who can potentially be seen as the problem.
I do.
And
when I hear about immigrants, I think about myself and my family straight away.
Exactly.
You know? Yeah.
And this has been, there for quite a long time now, and which is why I've always said, let's, in a fair way, because I think actually everybody living in Britain pretty much, whatever the colour of their skin, whatever their background, wants to see the immigration system work properly. Yeah. And it's mistakes like we've been talking about in terms of the prison service. It's what's happening with people coming across and being deported and come back in. That's what people worry about. And actually the truth is that, you know, people's concerns about the way our immigration system is being run is not just a white Britain's problem, issue of concern. It's actually people who are black, who are brown, of colour, who actually are also worried about it. And importantly, many of those people worry because they feel that when they walk down the street, people are pointing at them and saying, oh, you're part of the problem. And actually, most Britons of all colours are not part of the problem.
And it's not just about race either, Salma. It's, you know, one issue that this survey brings out is trans rights. That, you know, the public opinion has shifted significantly on trans rights, believing it's gone too far, doubling since 2020, now at 39% from 17% of those believe it's gone too far. That is also sort of worrying. We feel like we're sort of really are very divided on so many levels. But what, I don't feel like we used to be.
What does that mean, though, like it's gone too far? This is the kind of question, because we have these kind of very binary statements that are put out there. For most people, for trans people having their rights and their right to exist in their own bodies in the way that they see fit, that's not wrong, OK? There is compounding effects that divide us, but I am actually not surprised by this survey. And I will say that, for me, I still think that Britain is getting better and we are still a very tolerant country. Because if I think back to the 80s and 90s growing up, there was, you know, far more racism, far more obvious racism on the streets then. And I think we are becoming a more tolerant society, and I don't think we should give in because we've seen one survey that the majority is divisive.
However, some people might say, I agree with you about the 70s and 80s were worse, but some people say some of the discourse that we're hearing from some politicians, the kind of things that wouldn't be acceptable in the past. We did Sarah Poachin from Reform not long ago. She would have been sacked from a party many years ago, but she's allowed to keep on going on with quite blatant racism about people like you and I on our TV screens.
But she has been censured by lots of people in mainstream politics, and I think even Nigel Farage said that I don't think her intention was racist. So the only point that I'm trying to make there is that I don't think everybody's just allowed to get away with it, without being challenged.
Yeah, I think that's right. But there's an awful lot of people putting stuff out there and then later on saying, "I'm sorry." When they're censored for it. And the question is, why did they put it out there in the first place? The other aspect that is so different from the 70s and 80s is, if you just have a megaphone and you're out in the street, a few people will hear you. Now we've got a digital megaphone that just amplifies everything. And, of course, the other worrying thing is people not prepared to hear another person's point of view in all of this. Everyone's in their echo chamber.
That's a very good point.
And feeling that their view is only the right view.
Which leads us to the next, which is, again, connected in many ways, is Prevent. Now, this is the programme where people can report individuals who they feel may have extremist views and potentially could be even involved in violent actions. And it's sort of an anti-terrorism programme, isn't it? And it hit a record high last year, rising more than a quarter to 8,778 referrals. Now, quite a lot of them are young people who are simply violent, but not necessarily have any kind of ideology. Which is like, where is that coming from? I mean, has that always been the case? It's just now we're reporting on it? But young people who want to go and commit violence or could potentially go and commit violence or have got extreme views, but they're not necessarily linked to any politician or group.
There are some really interesting findings with Prevent. There have been 2 reviews in recent years of the Prevent programme and something called the Channel programme, which is how you refer people to seek help or, seek answers for some of the extreme views. Part of what happens is that you have ideological, issues. So Islamist terrorism, for example, is one of the reasons that Prevent exists. Part of the issue, as we've discovered over Prevent, is that you have a situation where actually people are very psychologically susceptible to that kind of violence. But the question is, how are the referrals working and how are you helping people try a different path and go on to a different path? And I think that is way more critical about Prevent, and there are still answers that we don't have about the way that we use the data, the way that it talks to the systems, and how we get public safety as a priority in the Prevent programme.
Yeah. It is. I mean, when I was on the Intelligence Security Committee, one of the things we talked about with the intelligence agencies is obviously, for a long time, I mean, absolutely rightly, the focus on what we would call what we expect of terrorism, which is political ideology, faith ideologies that inform that. But, we talked and it looks like it's happening now, is more focus on those with extreme views where they are working individually as well, and particularly on extreme right-wing.
Well, this is the other thing that's interesting, actually, the public perception might be quite different, but actually, by far, the most referrals they had was for extreme right-wing, far-right type of terrorism. In second place was people from the Asian community and Islamic extremism. In third place was young black people. But overwhelmingly was and you don't get that feeling sometimes when you look at certain sections of the media. Let's say.
Yeah, no, and it's a concern that has been raised, and it looks like they're acting on it. But Salma's point's right. You can refer all you like, but actually what happens with those young people.
No, absolutely.
And, I think the public need to be more confident about that next step after the referral.
Let's move on. Rachel Reeves. Rachel Reeves and the budget. This is going to be interesting because a recently elected deputy leader, Lucy Powell, has said that don't break the manifesto. Now, it's quite clear. I mean, it's almost everyone's kind of accepted that's going to happen.
Well, should we talk about... It's actually directly reported, isn't it, in the Times? Income tax will go up, and Rachel Reeves has passed over this information. She's formally informed the Office for Budget Responsibility that a rise in personal taxation is one of the major measures on tax she is preparing to announce this month. That doesn't mean to say it's definitely going to happen. she can change her mind, of course. But I think we all thought from the beginning of the week, and that's been the speculation. And she's got a division now with the newly appointed, in the last month, deputy leader.
I mean,
Look at your face.
Salma can't wait to laugh. Salma just wants to laugh at this one.
It's almost as if we said your taxes would go up under a Labour government.
Well, I mean, well...
Caroline, you have the floor.
Well, Lucy Powell's intervention, and so it begins. Look, so, I mean, the thing is, Lucy might say we shouldn't break the manifesto, but at the end of the day, money's going to be found. So maybe Lucy's putting that out there. Maybe, I don't know, she supports a mansion tax or something. But, I mean, look, there is a big hole in the finances. There's a whole number of reasons to do with that. We have not recovered as a country since the financial crash back in 2008 and 2009. Whatever people have tried to do under Cameron and since then and now, it's not working. And that primarily is about we're not getting growth. So the problem is here, the Chancellor needs money in the short term to shore things up. But the reality is actually taxing people isn't going to help us get to be more prosperous and grow as the economy. And she's in this dilemma. I mean, the Chancellor, every Chancellor, shares their figures with the OBR. This is a leak that's happened. She has got time to think about what she does. She may think about national insurance, not on employers, but on all of us as an alternative. But she's in a bind here, and all this speculation before and suggestions from deputy leaders and others that somehow it's going to go down this route isn't really helpful as she approaches probably the most difficult career decision of her political career.
Caroline, she did also start the speculation herself with a very unprecedented...
It was extraordinary.
The Chancellor stands up and gives this speech that's a bit like...
What was your thinking of her intention on that? Because... you know, you think, OK, she's going to come out, front it up, she's got to put income tax up, she's breaking the manifesto. That would have been one way to go. The other way would be carry on letting the speculation. But to take over the airwaves everywhere and then not say anything.
Yes.
What was her thinking politically?
So the only thing that seems rational as to why she did that is like some bag carrier, like my former job, has gone, oh, we're going to have to make this difficult decision. Let's just signal it somehow.
But doesn't
it was
that
such
normally
a dramatic...
happen with sort of
briefings?
Quiet people like you running out and slipping the word
Exactly. But so this dramatic sort of taking over the airways, I think, was totally unnecessary. A, for her to say nothing, and B, for her to sort of run it up the flagpole and just be like, how are you all going to feel if I put your taxes up? Well, you know, not great. Yeah. But ultimately, there is a proper process to do this. The reason why Caroline mentioned the leak to the OBR, and this is really, really important, is that government officials, even if you're sort of putting stuff out, you have to be so careful because this is market-moving stuff. And it is really inappropriate for these kinds of measures to leak in this way as well. Yeah. And once you break government discipline in that way, it's very bad.